Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are very pleased to be joined by author Khan Wong tonight to talk about his novel, The Circus Infinite.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing flips with joy to talk about this book.
Oh, yay. That's what everyone wants to hear.
But before we dive into our actual topic for today, let's all start with something great that happened lately.
I don't have anything really specific. I guess I could say it rained. That's always a good thing. I've been in a really great mood this week for some reason, which is always nice. I don't have a particular cause for that, but
you don't have to have a reason to be in a good mood.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Well, it's been a particularly good mood, and I don't know why. It just has been, but that's been nice.
Well, congrats.
Thank you.
Khan?
Well, yesterday I had lunch with two friends that I haven't seen in years.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was really great. It was a lovely reunion, and they're friends from another chapter of life. So it was like it was a big nostalgia kind of fest.
Yeah.
But also it was just great to see them and reconnect, especially after the past couple of years that we've had. So that was cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I made 24 deviled eggs this weekend. I really love deviled eggs, but I usually depend on other people making them for me. But I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. Most of them were very ugly, but that's okay because I'm the one who ate them all.
Appearance has no bearing on taste.
It's true. So that was great. A lot of eggs, a lot of peeling eggs, but it was worth it. And what is everyone drinking tonight? I'll start with this one. I have some blueberry lemonade that I have spiked, and it is quite lovely.
I have the remnants of a bottle of wine that I needed to drink before it went bad.
I'm just having water.
Water is good too.
Yeah. I just have a policy of remain sober until after the interview.
I mean, probably quite sensible. Actually.
More responsible than us.
Yes.
One person on this podcast will be very well hydrated after this. It won't be me. Well, since this is a book podcast, has anyone read anything good lately?
I read Run with the Hunted, I think is the name of the novel, or maybe that's the name of the series. It's not a novel, it's a novella by Jen Donahue, I think is the author, which is like a fun kind of science fiction heist series. I was promised Dog Heist in later books in the series. So,
well,
yes,
my curiosity's piqued.
So that was fun. It's a short book. Like I said, it's a novella, so it took me an hour and a half to read.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the last book I finished reading was an arc for a book called Mercury Rising, which is by a fellow Angry Robot author, R.W.W. Green, and the book's coming out in May, I think. And it's a combination alternate history, alien invasion, and military sci-fi kind of all at once. And
that's cool.
It's pretty great. And I'm not saying that just because they are also published by my publisher.
What era of alternate history is it?
1970s.
Oh, cool.
Late 60s and 1970s. And I just started another arc for a book called The Book Eaters by
Ooh, I've heard really good things about that.
I really just barely started it. I've had it forever, and I've been terrible with keeping up with my reading since the holidays, basically. But so I've had this arc for a while now, and I'm just getting started on it, and it's so good.
I have an answer for this for once. I usually don't. But it's only a half answer because it's a graphic novel. But I've started reading Kill 6 Billion Demons.
I like the title.
I've read that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I've only just started. My husband, Danny, loves the webcomic, and it's getting a print edition by Image Comics, I think.
I think so.
So he rushed out and got a bunch of them. And so it's harder for me to read comics online, or my phone is too small is really the problem. Yeah. So now that we have physical copies, I've started it, and I'm really interested to see where it goes. I've just barely started.
Yeah, the artwork is just astounding for that series. The art in particular is, yeah, awesome.
It's wasted on me. I don't, I mean, I like it, but I'm definitely not someone who can evaluate art styles well. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Circus Infinite. Yes, the Circus Infinite.
Correct, yes.
The singular. Before we actually begin, I wanted to say this isn't really a question, so apologies in advance. This is more of a comment. But as someone who identifies as ace, I really, really appreciated seeing an ace character in a relationship, because I feel like that's not something that we see represented very often in traditional media. At least it's not something that I've seen very often. So I thought that was wonderful. And I really, really liked Jess and Boat. They were so cute.
Thank you. It was fun writing them, for sure. I wanted to depict that relationship for the same reason, as you just said. That's not something that I've personally seen a lot of and want to see more of. So, and I'm firmly of the, write the books you want to read mindset. So,
absolutely.
I would almost call it maybe not a slow burn, but it's quite a ways through the book before they actually go on a date, isn't it? If I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. I remember when you first realize they're on a date and going, oh, I didn't see that coming, but it's very cute. And their banter was so sweet the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that their relationship develops is just really great. It's this low key thing, and there's never any pressure. And I just, yeah, I'll stop gushing about it, but I really liked it.
That's so awesome to hear. Thank you so much.
I mean, also really liked it, but I especially loved the depictions of platonic relationships in this book, because I feel like in books where the main character does have a romance plotline, platonic relationships do tend to get kind of pushed to the side, whereas that did not happen here. I mean, a lot of it is about Jess building strong relationships at all for the first time, right? So it makes sense that we're getting romantic and platonic, just people. Basically, I want Quint to give me a hug too. I'm going with this.
Yeah, we all need a Quint.
Yeah. Yeah, he was just such a solid friend, and always, knew the right thing to say to help people get through a hard time. And that was just really lovely. A lot of this book gave me the warm and fuzzies. There's some books where it's oh, it was, so harrowing, but I felt really good after. This book, no, it was just almost the entire time just made you feel really happy, even during the kind of scary, tense moments, because a lot of those are in flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And since Jess gets out of that, it keeps it from being too overwhelming, I thought.
Well, it's really nice to see people supporting each other, and you get a lot of that in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I don't know.
Yeah, that wasn't a question. Sorry. We liked it. All right. Now that it's out of the way. Just from some quick Googling, we saw in your bio that you have both circus and a music background. And can you talk a little bit about that and how that informed your writing of this book?
Sure. Well, circus I did more avocationally, mm-hmm. and music was always just purely a hobby and at total amateur level, basically. But I used to work for a music school in Chicago called the Old Town School of Folk Music, and I ran the open mic nights there. And there was this singer-songwriter guy who I might just be reminiscing too much and going too much into detail about that is really necessary.
Not at all.
So at one of these open mic nights, I met this singer-songwriter guy, and we got to talking about music that we liked, and we had a lot of similar taste. And I was playing cello at the time, and he was like, "Oh, I really want some cello for some of my songs." And so I just started playing with him and doing cello lines to his, acoustic guitar singer-songwriter thing. And it was, I basically played the root of each chord. Like it wasn't like super complex or like groundbreaking or anything, but it sounded really cool. So that was the extent of my music career. Like we never went on tour or like did big gigs or anything like that. But the circusy stuff did go a little farther. I started out fire dancing with a prop called poi. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is. And I like, in that first flush of like learning those props, you kind of want to try out everything. And when I tried the hoop for the first time, something just really, like some switch went off in my brain. And I got really obsessed with it and started like putting up videos on early YouTube and like performing around in San Francisco. And like the broader community started taking note of my movement style. And I started getting invited to fire gatherings and festivals and retreats and to teach and stuff like that. So that was like a hobby that paid for a lot of free trips and like costuming and toys to play with and stuff. And on one of my stints, I did a tour through Southeast Asia with a circus. And that was a really transformative experience. And my experience in overall, that whole chapter of my life was about 10 years. And all of that performing and touring and just being backstage kind of experiences totally informed the Circus Infinite a lot.
That's incredible.
As listeners might have figured out, there is a circus in this book. But the way you write about both the circus acts and the acrobatics and everything, but also the musical accompaniment clearly just has so much love and passion for both of those art forms. I think it really came through on the page.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
I noticed when I was reading this book, there are some really strong themes and conversations around the concept of consent as a source of comfort by Jess's friends who actually respect his boundaries, but then also really used as a weapon, by the institution who completely takes away his consent, and Dax, who creates this sort of false consent by requiring Jess to say out loud, "I agree," to things he has actually no freedom to say no to. And I was just wondering, how you balanced those two sort of extremes of this really kind of fraught concept.
So a lot of it was kind of subconscious. Like I didn't really quite realize what I was doing until after, like I had finished drafting and looked and saw it on the page, So in the community context, my goal had been really just to model consent and conversations around it and how it can be done in a way that's loving and considerate. It's not a mood killer or whatever,
Yeah.
Sometimes framed as, or it's not, this is like big pain. And with Dax, so some of the way Dax approached it has to do with, it's actually an element of world building that doesn't get explored very much in this book. There was more about it that ended up getting cut. I'm hoping to write more in this universe, in which case a future story will be able to dive into this more. But one of the guiding principles of this society, which is called the 9-Star Congress of Conscious Worlds, one of the guiding principles is that of free will. And so for the like ruling body of this universe, the law of free will is kind of paramount and is just the guiding aspect of like every other law or thing that they have. And so Dax's kind of insistence on the person saying that, yes, they'll do it, the thing, even if it's under duress, is a nod to that. And so it's kind of pointing out a way that, as this way in which, as kind of cruel as Dax can be, there's still a part of him that in his way it thinks he's being ethical or, recognizing a person's autonomy.
It feels almost like kind of a perversion of that principle in my mind, like he takes it and he turns it into what he thinks it should be. I mean, like you say, he's still trying to abide by it, but it's not really.
But it's twisted. Yeah. Well, and he's twisted. So
That's true.
Yes.
He's following the letter of the law, right? He got verbal consent, even though it was coerced and not at all freely given.
Yeah.
He was a very cool, for listeners' context, he was a very cool sort of crime lord that we see. I guess that's maybe an exaggeration. No, I don't think it is. No.
It's not an exaggeration.
I guess, was that a spoiler? Maybe is the better question.
No, I think
no. It's in the copy.
That's revealed pretty quick. Okay.
Well, it's revealed in the marketing.
Yeah, the back of the book says local crime boss. Well, it says Nico, but Nico is Dax.
Yes.
Yes.
This is the problem I get into when I never read the backs of books. I never know what I can talk about. But he sort of controls or owns the circus that Jess joins when he is running away from the institute. The institution? The institute.
The institute, yeah.
Yes. Which we're going to talk about, but probably in the spoiler section, because we just get these really horrifying little nuggets of his time in the institute sort of scattered throughout the book that, speaking of contrast with how warm and welcoming his friends are, oh boy, was that place no good.
Yeah, that definitely is the way you weave that into the present time story. It really is a very sharp contrast to see what Jess has left versus what he's going into.
Well, the reason why the Institute was interested in him is that Jess has some supernatural powers. Primarily, he is an empath. He can, I believe the word used in the book is sus. He can suss out people's emotions. He can't read their minds, right? That's very explicitly a different thing.
Yeah.
But I was wondering how you build tension in a world where there are so many characters, especially the main character, that has these supernatural insights into other people.
Well, I think the tension comes from, so there's a scene, I don't think it's a spoiler. I don't know if it's a spoiler or not. I mean, it's not like a major plot thing, but it is a character. it's like, I don't know.
Which scene is it? Tell us.
Oh, so it's a scene where it's when they go to the sex club and Jess is paying empathic attention to how Esme is dealing with the hostess. Mm-hmm. And so that there's a little bit of it is when folks of similar abilities just have an extra sense. It's really just they have an extra sense of what whoever they're dealing with is feeling. And I don't know. That's a interesting question because I hadn't thought of it in terms of tension or like using it in a manipulative way. I mean, Jess does use his powers to the empathy anyway, as a means of gaining insight into whoever he's talking to, but he's not really manipulating them.
Well, I think like for me as a reader, knowing how the other characters are reacting through Jess sussing them, it changes the way that I view a scene versus scenes where some of that tension is because you don't know how the characters are actually, you see what's on the page, of course, and how the author is describing things, how you're describing things. But because you don't have that insight into actually what they're feeling, it is a different layer of complexity there.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. And it would have been, I don't know, it was kind of a challenge writing that element because I didn't want to tip into being an omniscient narrator, but it is established that Jess has these empathic abilities, which as far as abilities in this universe is not that it's not rare for humans anyway. And we can talk about all that more maybe in the spoiler section. I don't know. Where was I going with that though? So I didn't want to tip into it being omniscient, but it is established that Jess has this extra sense. So I could, once that was established, it couldn't be ignored, really, So I wanted, what I tried to do was have enough acknowledgement of what he was picking up from other people on the page without kind of explaining too much, what was happening.
Yeah. And I definitely, I mean, personally, I think it worked for me quite well. So I really enjoyed seeing how Jess viewed the world and how he used his abilities to suss, what other people were feeling and how that plays into the larger story.
I especially liked how differently his understanding is described from some of the other characters who are a different, they're not human, they're a different species. Asuna, am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah.
And they have a sort of a different empathic ability. And it's mostly like they can sense sexual tension or desire, and how those empathic abilities are so functionally different, but can still be used in similar ways. I thought was like a very neat way of really exploring Jess's powers by giving us other examples of people who have sort of slightly different things going on.
Yay.
Yeah, I liked it. Okay, we have a real question for you.
Yeah, so this is more of a broad question or a broader question, but how much do you plan when you write?
Oh, so the Circus Infinite actually is an interesting evolution of my process. So the books I had written prior to this one, I always outlined. And for the Circus Infinite, I had done the world building ahead of time. I had like created the different species and their histories and lore and their planets and all that background stuff. I had done all that work ahead of time for a different project, which I decided wasn't really quite working. But I was so enamored of the world that I wanted to write something else, that was set in this universe.
Which understandable, because it's a really incredible world building.
Thank you. I really hope I get the chance to do more in this world. Anyway, so I didn't want all that world building to go to waste. And I had always had on my writer bucket list writing a circus story, but I had always envisioned it as being like a Earthbound, in our world, like Cirque du Soleil, backstage, whatever. And it hadn't occurred to me to set it off world or anything. But when I was thinking about what to write in this world, I thought, oh, maybe I could do my circus story in space. And so that, and I had kind of an inkling of Jess's personality, and I just started writing. And so this was my first manuscript that I pantsed to use the colloquialism. Mm-hmm. So I had done all the world building, but story-wise, I had no idea. I just started writing, and I knew that Jess was on the run, but I wasn't clear from who or from what. And I knew that he was going to fetch up with this circus somehow, and adventures would ensue.
How could they not?
But I didn't. Yeah, but beyond that, I didn't really have any idea where it was going to go, what was going to happen. And it was when I got to the part where Amarià is bringing him to meet Nico Dax for that business meeting that they're having. That it was after writing that scene with Dax that then all the rest of the plot fell into place. So I basically pantsed it up till that point, and then I had a plan after that.
Very cool.
So that's a long-winded answer to
both and neither at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
It really does take the sort of really almost integral concept of kid runs away to join the circus. I mean, that just goes in so many different directions from there. That's really fun. That was our last non-spoiler question. That's not true. We have one more question, but it's not for you because we're not going to make you answer this about your own book. But Sarah, why should you read this book?
You should read this book. Well, first, if you want great ace representation in a really sweet cute relationship. I cannot stress how much, like how great they are, how much I love Jess and Bo together, and how much I love their relationship. A lot of really fun alien species and incredible world building, really vivid descriptions of incredible physical feats. If you really want to go to the see the circus after reading a book, you should read this book.
The descriptions of the circus acts are just so incredible. Just, you clearly have such a clear idea in your head of what all of these things actually are, that describing them is just really fits on the page really incredibly. And that's why you should read this book. To avoid spoilers, skip to 4450. Oh my God, the Institute. What the fuck?
They were horrible. They were the worst.
Yes, they were.
I don't know what I would have done if those scenes had been flashbacks after we know that Jess, because I think the first time we see Jess is right after he's broken out, or not right after, but as he's running away.
Yes.
So in all of these moments with this like really horrifying torture and like dehumanization of these awful scientists, we always know that he's now out of there. And I don't know if I would have been able to read some of that, human dismemberment without that.
The thing about the Institute too is that we know from the very beginning that they're bad because Jess is running away from them. But the layers of bad just keep getting exposed through the flashbacks, and it just keeps getting worse. They just keep getting more horrible.
So, I mean, where did that come from? Is it why? What and how?
Well, I'm definitely building off of the trope of somebody with special abilities being examined inhumanely.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it too was that I knew what the end game was going to be with Matheson at the end, but because it was a tight third person, single point of view narrative, I couldn't really do there was no way to work in like Matheson's point of view or the people who were hunting him like throughout the timeline. So I wanted a way to both give insight into what Jess's recent past was and how it was kind of affecting how he approached current circumstances and current challenges, as well as use all that as a way to like build up the tension for the eventual confrontation with Matheson at the end. So that was the strategy there. And it was it just kept getting more horrible because like, I don't know, like people are horrible.
Well, that's true. You sort of just answered this, but I'll ask the question anyway. How did you navigate how much to reveal to the reader versus revealing to other characters in the book? Because we did get to see these flashbacks and we knew absolutely what happened in the Institute, whereas the other characters really only learned the bits and pieces that Jess tells them.
The way I approached what you're talking about was less a character and more, I guess, more literary. Mm-hmm. I wanted to show how much was behind what Jess said to the other characters. Well,
there was certainly no question whether he was justified or not in running away. That's for sure.
Kind of on still an Institute kick. They were just, I mean,
bone chilling.
Boy, they yes, they were bone chilling. They gave me the chills.
It's that true believer, like, because Matheson is like, I'm doing the right thing. You're the one being difficult. And that is just always the scariest thing to me, right? A villain who thinks they're doing the right thing. Ugh.
Exactly. Yeah, like Matheson was, those scenes were, they were kind of fun to write in a weird way, but also like, I don't like this person.
Yeah, I think sometimes writing villains can be a lot of fun, but at the same time, you don't want to spend too much time in their heads because you're like, oh, this is really not a great dude.
Yeah.
But so for me, the reveal that Nico Dax was related to the Institute or had ties to the Institute really, really blew me away. Is there anything that like you left in the book that someone would pick up on like on a reread that would reveal that? Or did you want that to be just a complete like surprise?
I wanted it to be a surprise, but not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, in multiple encounters with Dax, Jess senses sort of what he describes as a possessiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that's really like the only clue.
Mm-hmm.
We get the one clue that Dax knew Matheson's name, but that comes almost right. Like that comes pretty closely to when we find out the full story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much else going on at that moment that you don't really have time to stop and think about it, which is perfect because Jess is going through the exact same thing.
Yeah. What was the other? The other, I guess, clue would be the fact that, you know, that Dax alludes to having contacts, can easily like just report. He has people to talk to, you know, to let know where Jess is. So that was another little bit of a clue too, I think. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm getting a clue. Like I hadn't thought of it like that. But looking back in retrospect now, it's yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I took Dax saying that he could talk to people more as like he's a crime lord and has contacts like with I guess the Institute is kind of the authority too, but I wasn't
It doesn't surprise me that the Institute had crime lord contacts. It surprised me that Dax was one of them.
Yeah.
That totally tracks for them. They kind of steal babies. Kind of. I guess that they technically don't because they get the parents' approval. Like you said, that.
I mean, the baby commissions, basically.
Yeah. Commissioned babies, which is another layer of just horrible. I mean.
Mm-hmm. And that, like, the technical consent, because the parents say it's okay, but now that you've said that I feel like is going to have a lot of nuggets rereading this book and how society views, you know, verbal consent and everything.
Yeah. I also think that the reveal that is what the Institute was doing with the parents sheds a lot of light on Jess's interactions with his parents. You know, like you go back and you read it now and you're like, oh, this is why they were so emotionally detached. And this is why they're frankly pretty awful parents. Not the grandparents. The grandparents are great. But I imagine the grandparents had no idea that was what the parents had done.
A lot of the sort of conflicts in this book come from a really imbalanced power dynamic, where Jess is almost always at the bottom. The poor kid. But one of the things we do see throughout this book are conflicts between Aaliyah, the actual manager of the Circus Infinite, and her sister Danae, who is also one of Dax's employees, but she runs a nightclub. And they're much more on even footing. And at least as a reader, that made their interactions feel so different from any of the other conflicts in the book. And I was wondering if that was something that you were intentionally doing, or if it felt different to write those just because of that really different dynamic.
Mostly it was just sibling resentment. Like, well, of their relationship. And thank you for pointing out, though, that they are on even footing in terms of like their status, you know, in society. To be honest with you, I hadn't done that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was really just, oh, here are these sisters, and they're, you know, involved with this bad guy, but in different ways. So. I mean, that's how I approached it, and really, as I was writing their relationship, it was really rooted in just sisters that just don't get along.
And that's sure true.
Yes.
We see them pull together though, just for a moment. And then Danae kind of ruins it by being a huge jerk, to put it very simply. We have a couple other sort of more broad questions.
Okay.
Were there any scenes that surprised you when you were writing this book? I guess if you pantsed it, then maybe all of them.
Or pants partially anyway.
Yeah, pants partially. Let's see. Well, the whole chapter that you alluded to them being like realizing that they were on a date. And that's when they go on this thing called an orbital. That whole chapter was a surprise. And I hope this isn't like too much behind the curtain. Like
No such thing.
All right. Well, so that whole chapter came about as a result of a note that I got from my editor. Well, a couple of notes actually, but I try to do multiple things at once when I can anyway. So one of the notes was that they wanted to see more of Jess and Beau's relationship, and they wanted to see more of it developing. And then the other note was they wanted to see more of the world, because in the earlier draft, the locations were really limited to like the circus and Dex's office and like the house where they all live. So they wanted to see more of the world, and they wanted to see more of Jess and Beau's relationship. And I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? And then this idea of this orbital event popped into my head, and so that was a surprise because I hadn't planned it. I hadn't really thought about it. Like having something like that happen was just not really in my mind, and it was really sparked by these notes from my editor. The other thing that surprised and delighted me was there's a scene where Jess has to break into the magistrate's headquarters, essentially the police headquarters, and his friends come. Some of the acrobats come to help, and that also took me by surprise because so there had been a character that ended up not making the final cut, and she was basically Dax's like fixer / right hand woman, you know. And for various reasons, I decided it would be stronger for her to not be in the picture. But cutting her, because originally, the original version, Dax goes on that mission with that character. So cutting her, I had to figure out some other way of like, who's that? I mean, Jess isn't going to be doing this by himself. Like, who's going to be doing this with him? Blah, blah. And so that's how that whole scene came about. So that was the other big surprise for me.
I just really, I mean, again, this isn't a question. This is me just gushing. I really enjoyed how Jess actually like talks to his friends. And I feel like so often in novels, there's a lot of conflict because there's miscommunication, or there's characters who just don't impart information to their friends. And you don't see that in this book. And it was really refreshing. And especially in the scene that you were just talking about, it's really nice. I know that Jess isn't the one who calls the acrobats, but it's really nice to see, like I've said, just friends supporting each other without any questions, without hesitation. I really enjoyed that. So
we couldn't talk about that scene without bringing that up.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like that's a great example of that earlier comment that I had about communication. But you kind of already touched on this in talking about, you know, this character who got cut and the orbital scene that wasn't there. But how different is the final product, the finished book, from your first draft?
It's longer and it's more violent. So when I started out with the initial draft, with the very first draft that nobody ever saw, I was really going for a kind of cozy feel. Very much, I mean, I'm a big fan of Becky Chambers' Wayfarer's books, and so that was kind of like my model for the feeling that I wanted to imbue this with. So at first it was more along those lines, and the more harrowing stuff, both with the Institute and what Dax has just do, came later.
Interesting. I wouldn't have given some of the events in the book that are more violent. I wouldn't have imagined that it started out its life as kind of a more cozy sci-fi story.
Yeah, well, I mean, like all the chosen family trope and the emphasis on art making and community, and
that definitely remains.
Well, that was like the folk. That was the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so I was getting feedback like it needs more conflict. So I was like, okay, I'll conflict.
How about kids vaporizing each other for conflict? So I keep saying kids. We're not actually told how old Jess is, I don't think. He strikes me as pretty young, but not like a child.
No. He does state that his age, he gives his age as 20 at one point when Quint asks him about it. And most of the circus is like early 20s. Esme, because of the way, like of course this was a level of world building probably too far for to work cohesively in the book. Opal, which is the Asuno homeworld, the orbit is longer, so like a year for them would be more like a year and a half. Mm-hmm. Like to Earth years, which Earth isn't even a thing in this, but anyway. So I mean, so she, like, counting the years on her world is about the same age, but in actual time, because of the longer orbit and stuff, she's actually slightly older than the others. So, but like Quint and Essa, I would say are like in their 30s, and Alea and Danae are probably late 30s, early 40s.
So this is maybe a weird question. I don't know if you have an answer to this or not, but talking about how the Asuna homeworld has a longer orbit, how does that translate to age increased birthdays on Persephone 9 for them?
How do they celebrate their birthday?
Yeah, how do they celebrate?
Maybe that's why they don't leave. Wait, that's why they're so insular, because they don't want to figure out their birthdays.
I mean, I wouldn't want to do that math either, so valid.
There is a time measurement system called 9-star common time. This also, I don't go super into detail in this book, but this was something that had been in earlier drafts that I cut because it wasn't really plot relevant. Mm-hmm. But there is like a system of telling, like, quote unquote common time, which everybody uses. It's basically like in Star Trek when they have Stardate, blah blah blah. It's that. Yeah.
So they have their Asuna years, their Asuna age, and their standard age.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But when they're talking to outsiders, they would just give their standard age. Yeah.
Okay, I would love to hear a little bit about, since we have the encyclopedia with us, about this world. I can't believe the orbit scene or the orbital was added. I can't imagine the book without it, mostly because I really loved the Mantidean character, also whose name I can't pronounce.
Koshonar.
Okay. And the Mantideans are these sort of, insectoid intelligent beings who can see the weave of time. And that is used in such a anytime he comes into a scene, I'd perked up a little, because he was going to drop some really cryptic, baffling piece of wisdom that would come back usually pretty quickly. And that was just so fun. He might have been my favorite character.
Oh, well, I mean, they were all fun to write. Each time you mention a character that you really like, I'm like, oh, they were fun to write, but really they were all, with the exception of maybe Matheson, they were pretty all fun to write.
The orbital scene was so cinematic. I mean, all of the scenes that you had really are just so vivid and really well. I'm not normally a very visual reader, but I feel like with like the circus scenes and the orbital. I could really very vividly picture it in my mind. So it was very cinematic for me.
Great. I'm happy to hear that came through.
Well, we do have a couple of closing questions. Are you working on anything currently, and can you tell us a little bit about it, if you are?
Sure. I am working on a standalone, and I describe it as Final Fantasy meets Logan's Run.
Wow. Tell me more.
So I'm like, I can't, like everything would be a spoiler at this point.
Okay, fair.
Into detail, but it's being super fun. I had gotten 30,000 words into it, writing one point of view character, and realized that this particular story really needs multiple points of view. And then like progress got sidelined because then it came time to like do all the edits for Circus Infinite and then like promotional stuff and everything. So I'm getting back to that. However, I have already written and turned into my agent a follow-up book that's set in the same universe as the Circus Infinite.
Ooh.
And like, I don't know how much I'm like, I mean, I can tell you that it exists. It hasn't formally been pitched to the publisher yet. And so whether or not they take it, a lot will depend on sales for Circus Infinite. And so I hope it goes well enough, because I definitely have more stories set in this universe. And I do want to follow up with Jess. There's like some really interesting stuff that he's going to have to confront in the next time we meet up with him. But this second book, the main character is Esme.
Ooh.
See, the problem is I have a million questions and I can't ask any of them now.
So I can tell you that the main character is Esme. It's a few years after the events of the Circus Infinite. Her own music career has blown up and has put her in conflict with her more closed-minded and xenophobic homeworld.
I absolutely need this book. Want to read it. I hope that it gets picked up. Just I need it.
So where can we follow you to find out news about this book and other things, Khan Wong?
Well, I'm most active on Twitter. I am Cosmic Khan, one word. That's my Twitter handle, with the little @ symbol. So you can find me there. My website is khanwong.com. And I do have like a newsletter sign up function.
You can sign up for the newsletter.
You can sign up for a newsletter. But I haven't actually done a newsletter yet, and I don't really know what I would say in a newsletter at this point. Like, there's not much news to report at this point. And yeah, like I am subscribed to some other writers' newsletter, and I like Rika Oki's in particular. Like, she's always has these really cool like essays about some topic, and I'm like, I don't know how she does that on a regular basis.
She's incredibly prolific. I see her tweet about her newsletter on Twitter, and I'm always like, wow, I'm so impressed by how much you put out, how much content you're writing, and it's good content too.
And it's really good, yeah, and it's a little intimidating and daunting, actually. So yeah, very impressive. So I'm not at that level. So my newsletter, I have yet to send out a newsletter. I don't know what. I mean, probably the first one will just be a thank you for reading my book. I'd like.
Oh, and that you're on the super cool podcast, and everyone should go listen to it.
Yes.
There you go. We're giving you.
Oh, that could be. Oh, in my
too.
newsletter, you mean? I was like, well, I mean, they'll hear this podcast when they hear this. I mean, they'll hear that when they hear it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was so much fun to talk to you about the Circus Infinite. On sale now, I assume?
It is out.
Now.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
It is on sale wherever books are sold.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram @FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.